In the quiet town of Ashwood, blind woman Emily Carter relies on her loyal guide dog, Rocky, to navigate life. But when a dangerous biker named Jake threatens her, Rocky's heroic instincts are revealed, saving Emily from harm. Emily soon learns Rocky's incredible past as a retired K-9 military dog who once saved lives on the battlefield. Inspired by his bravery, Emily confronts her own fears, learning self-defense and gaining confidence. Together, they rebuild their lives, inspiring others with their story of resilience and second chances. What do you think of Emily and Rocky's incredible journey? Do you have a favorite moment? Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. If the story moved you, please subscribe to DG Story for more inspiring tales. Don't forget to like, share, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. Join us as we celebrate courage, love, and the bonds that define us. Nestled deep in the southern countryside, Ashwood was a peaceful town where time seemed to move slower, the kind of place where neighbors greeted each other by name. And the Ashwood Community Park served as the town's heart, with its serene pond and winding shaded trails. It was the perfect retreat for residents seeking tranquility. Every morning, Emily Carter walked those paths with her steadfast guide dog, Rocky. At 32, Emily had learned to navigate life without sight after a car accident stole her vision 3 years ago. It hadn't been easy. The loss was profound, but Rocky, a strong and composed German shepherd, was her anchor. More than just a guide, he was her protector, her companion, and her source of independence. On this particular morning, the park was alive with activity. Children's laughter echoed near the playground, and joggers exchanged cheerful greetings as they passed. Emily moved with confidence, her cane tapping softly against the paved path while Rocky guided her with calm precision. The soft rustle of leaves in the breeze and the faint scent of blooming wildflowers filled her senses, momentarily replacing her lingering worries with peace. But serenity in Ashwood was sometimes fleeting. Jake Malloy, a notorious troublemaker, had claimed the park as his hangout. Known for his loud, confrontational antics, Jake thrived on making others uncomfortable. Today, his attention settled on Emily. "Well, look what we have here," Jake sneered, his tone laced with mockery. Startled, Emily halted, her fingers tightening instinctively around Rocky's harness. The dog immediately went on alert, his ears perking up and his stance stiffening as he sensed the tension. "What's a blind girl like you doing out here alone? Got yourself a dog to do all the thinking for you," Jake taunted, drawing chuckles from his nearby friends. Emily's pulse quickened, but her voice remained steady. "I'm not alone," she said firmly, "and I'm here to enjoy my walk, like anyone else." "Enjoy your walk?" Jake took a step closer, his boots crunching on the gravel path. "Seems to me you'd be pretty helpless without that mutt. What happens if he vanishes?" Rocky let out a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through the air like distant thunder. Emily rested a calming hand on his head, though she felt her unease growing. "Please leave us alone," she said, her tone calm but edged with resolve. Jake laughed, his harsh tone cutting through the peaceful ambience of the park. He reached out as if to touch Rocky, but the dog moved in a blur, stepping protectively in front of Emily. His growl deepened, and his bared teeth glinted in the sunlight, leaving no doubt about his intention to defend her. "Whoa, easy there," Jake said, stumbling back. Though he smirked, his voice betrayed nervousness. "Looks like your dog's got some fight in him." Emily tightened her grip on Rocky's harness. "Let's go," she said firmly. The German shepherd obeyed, his gaze locked on Jake until they were well down the path. As they walked away, Emily's thoughts raced. Rocky's swift, calculated reaction was far beyond what she had ever seen from a guide dog. Who had Rocky been before he came into her life? And what secrets did his past hold? The unsettling encounter at the park lingered in Emily's mind as she and Rocky made their way home. She tried to shake it off, telling herself that Jake's words were nothing more than childish taunts. But something about the way he had approached her, the menace in his tone and the smirk on his face, left her uneasy. Rocky, as always, walked close to her side, his movements calm and steady. Yet Emily could feel the tension in his body. He was unusually alert, his ears flicking back at every sound. She placed a comforting hand on his head as they approached her small, cozy house on the outskirts of Ashwood. "Good boy, Rocky," she murmured as they reached the front porch. Unlocking the door, she stepped inside, the familiar scent of lavender and wood polish easing her nerves. She unhooked Rocky's harness, letting him roam freely as she prepared dinner. The rhythmic click of his nails on the hardwood floors reassured her. Later that evening, Emily settled into her favorite armchair with a book in Braille. The soft hum of the evening news played in the background. Rocky lay at her feet, his head resting on his paws. The tension from the park began to fade, replaced by the comforting routine of home. But just as she began to relax, Rocky's head shot up, his ears stood erect, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. Emily's heart skipped a beat. "What is it, Rocky?" she asked, her voice wavering. Rocky moved to the front door, his posture rigid, his growl deepening. Emily listened intently, straining to hear what had alerted him. First, there was nothing, just the usual hum of crickets outside. Then she caught it, the faint crunch of gravel, footsteps drawing closer to the house. Her grip tightened on the armrest of her chair. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice steady despite the fear bubbling inside her. There was no response, but the footsteps grew louder. Rocky barked sharply, a sound so fierce it made Emily jump. She rose from her chair, her hands gripping the cane by her side. "Stay back," she shouted, her voice firm now. A laugh broke the silence outside, a cruel, familiar laugh that made her blood run cold. "Relax, lady," Jake's voice called out. "Just thought I'd pay you and your little mutt a visit." Rocky's barking intensified, his body pressed against the door as if ready to burst through it. Emily's mind raced. She fumbled for her phone, quickly dialing the sheriff's office while trying to calm herself. "Sheriff's Department." The operator answered. "This is Emily Carter," she said quickly. "There's someone outside my house. He's threatening me. Please send help." "Stay on the line, ma'am," the operator replied. "Help is on the way." Emily set the phone down on the table, her hands trembling. She moved closer to Rocky, her fingers brushing against his fur. "It's okay, boy," she whispered. "We'll be okay." The tension in the air was palpable as Emily stood behind Rocky, her hand resting on his back. She could feel the strength and readiness coursing through him, as though he were preparing for whatever threat awaited. Outside, Jake's footsteps crunched closer, his voice mocking and taunting. "You really think that mutt can keep you safe?" Jake sneered, his tone dripping with contempt. "What's he gonna do? Bark me to death?" Rocky's growl deepened, his body low and poised, ready to act at a moment's notice. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, but she took a deep breath to steady herself. "Leave now, Jake," she called out, her voice firm and unwavering. "The police are on their way." For a moment, there was silence. Then Jake's laughter cut through the night air like a blade. "The cops," he mocked. "Oh, I'm so scared. They're not here yet, are they?" Emily's grip on her cane tightened. She knew she had to remain calm, but her fear was mounting with each passing second. She felt Rocky shift slightly under her hand, his focus laser sharp on the door. Suddenly, there was a loud bang as Jake pounded on the door, rattling it on its hinges. "Come on out, lady," he shouted. "Let's see what you and your mutt are made of." Rocky erupted into action, barking furiously, his teeth bared as he leapt against the door. The sheer force of his presence seemed to give Jake pause. Emily heard him mutter something under his breath, followed by the sound of retreating footsteps. Emily exhaled, relief flooding her senses. "That's right," she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. "Keep walking." But the reprieve was short-lived. Jake hadn't gone far. She heard him call out to someone, and a moment later, another voice joined his. There were at least 2 of them now. Emily felt her stomach drop. "Looks like we've got company," she whispered to Rocky. The dog barked again, loud and commanding, as if warning the intruders not to come any closer. Emily's phone buzzed on the table. Startling her, she quickly answered. "Emily Carter," a calm voice said. "This is Deputy Morgan. We're en route to your location. Are you safe right now?" "Yes," Emily replied, her voice shaky. "But they're still outside. I think there are 2 of them now. Stay inside and keep your dog with you," Deputy Morgan instructed. "We're just a few minutes away. Don't engage with them." Emily nodded, though the deputy couldn't see her. "Okay, please hurry." As she hung up, another loud bang shook the door. Rocky barked louder than ever, his body pressing against the wood as if to shield her from whatever lay beyond. Emily crouched down beside him, her hand gripping his fur tightly. "You've got this, Rocky," she whispered. "I trust you." The pounding on the door grew more aggressive, the wood creaking under the force. Emily's heart raced as she clung to Rocky, her mind racing through worst-case scenarios. Outside, Jake's voice rang out again, taunting and cruel. "What's the matter, Emily? Scared? Why don't you send your hero dog out here to face me?" Rocky's bark echoed through the house, deep and fierce. It wasn't just a sound. It was a statement, a warning that he wasn't backing down. Emily felt a flicker of hope amidst her fear, bolstered by Rocky's unwavering presence. Suddenly, there was a loud crash as something heavy slammed against the window. Emily gasped, instinctively moving closer to Rocky. The sound of glass cracking filled the air, and Emily knew Jake was escalating. She fumbled for her phone again, her trembling fingers dialing back to the sheriff's office. "This is Emily Carter," she said urgently. "They're trying to break in. Please hurry." "We're almost there, ma'am," the dispatcher assured her. "Stay where you are." The next moment felt like it stretched into eternity. Another bang rattled the door, and Emily could hear Jake and his accomplice arguing outside. One of them cursed loudly, and then there was a deafening silence. Emily froze, straining to hear what was happening. Rocky stood still as well, his ears perked, his body tense. Then came the sound of heavy boots stomping onto the porch. The door shuddered again, this time under what felt like a direct kick. And that was when Rocky moved, with a ferocity Emily had never witnessed before. Rocky leapt at the door, slamming his weight against it with enough force to make it groan. His barks were deafening, each one a sharp command to back off. The chaos outside faltered. Jake and his accomplice hesitated, clearly not expecting the sheer power of the dog's response. "You're crazy, man," one of them yelled. "That dog's gonna rip us apart." Jake's bravado cracked. "Fine, let's get out of here," he snarled, his voice shaking. "But this isn't over." Emily heard their footsteps retreating, the sound growing fainter until it disappeared altogether. She let out a shaky breath, tears streaming down her face as she reached out to Rocky. He turned to her, his breathing heavy but his eyes calm and steady. "You did it, Rocky," she whispered, wrapping her arms around his neck. "You saved us." The sound of sirens in the distance brought a wave of relief. Moments later, red and blue lights flashed outside her window, and a knock came at the door. "Sheriff's Department," a voice called. Emily opened the door to see 2 deputies standing there, their hands on their holsters. She quickly recounted what had happened, her voice still trembling. As she spoke, Rocky sat beside her, his watchful eyes scanning the porch as if ensuring the danger was truly gone. Deputy Morgan crouched down, extending a hand toward Rocky. "You've got a real hero here," he said with a smile. "He deserves a medal for what he did tonight." Emily nodded, her hand resting on Rocky's head. "He's more than a hero," she said softly. "He's family." The house was quiet the next morning, but Emily's mind was anything but. The events of the previous night played on a loop in her head: Jake's threats, the pounding on the door, and Rocky's unwavering bravery. She reached down to pet him as he lay by her feet, his eyes half closed in contentment. "You're incredible, Rocky," she murmured. "But who are you really?" The question had been nagging at her ever since their encounter at the park. Rocky's reaction to danger was far beyond what she expected from a guide dog. The precision, the control, and the sheer force of his actions all pointed to a past she didn't fully understand. Determined to find answers, Emily called the training center where she had adopted Rocky. The friendly voice on the other end of the line recognized her instantly. "Emily, how are you and Rocky doing?" "We're doing well," she replied cautiously. "But I need to ask you something about him." "Of course," the woman said. "What's on your mind?" Emily hesitated before diving in. "Last night, someone tried to break into my house. Rocky, he protected me in ways I didn't know he could. It was like he knew exactly what to do, like he's been trained for situations like that. Is there something about his past that I don't know?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, long enough to make Emily wonder if the call had dropped. Then the woman cleared her throat. "I think you should speak to someone who knows Rocky's history better than I do. His name is Ben Harris. He's a former handler from the K9 unit where Rocky served before retiring." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "Rocky was a K9? "Yes," the woman confirmed. "He was one of the best, but after sustaining an injury during his last deployment, he was retired from active service. We partnered with his handlers to rehome him, and that's how he ended up with you." The revelation left Emily momentarily speechless. She had always known Rocky was special, but to learn he had been a military dog added a whole new layer to her understanding of him. "Do you have Ben Harris's contact information?" Emily asked finally. "I'll send it to you," the woman replied. "I think he'd be happy to talk to you about Rocky. He was very attached to him." After hanging up, Emily sat back in her chair, her mind racing. She glanced down at Rocky, who was now sitting upright, watching her with his steady gaze. "You've been through so much, haven't you?" she said softly. "It's time I learned your story." The next day, Emily dialed the number for Ben Harris, her heart pounding as she waited for the line to connect. She had rehearsed what she would say, but when a deep, friendly voice answered, her words faltered. "This is Ben Harris," the voice said. "Hi, Mr. Harris." Emily began hesitantly. "My name is Emily Carter. I was given your number by the training center where I adopted my guide dog, Rocky. They said you might be able to tell me more about him." There was a brief pause before Ben responded, his tone warming with recognition. "Rocky? You adopted him? How's he doing?" "He's amazing," Emily said, smiling despite her nerves. "He's been my guide dog for the past 2 years, and he's changed my life. But something happened recently, and I realized there's so much about his past that I don't know. They told me he was a K9 in the military." Ben chuckled softly. "More than that, Rocky was one of the finest K9s I ever worked with. I was his handler for 4 years." Emily's breath caught. "You trained him?" "I did," Ben confirmed. "And I can tell you, Rocky isn't just any dog. He's a hero. He saved lives. Emily, mine included." The weight of Ben's words sank in as Emily listened intently. "Can you tell me more? What happened?" Ben sighed, his voice tinged with nostalgia. "Rocky and I served together on multiple deployments. He was trained for search and rescue, bomb detection, and protection. There were missions where his instincts saved entire squads. But the last mission we went on, it was different." Emily heard the change in his tone, a heaviness that suggested the memory still haunted him. She waited patiently as Ben gathered his thoughts. "We were in a war zone," he continued, his voice quieter now. "There was an explosion, a roadside bomb. Rocky detected it just in time to push me out of harm's way. He took the brunt of the blast himself. That's how he got the scar on his left flank." Emily's hand instinctively reached down to Rocky, her fingers brushing against the fur on his side. She had felt the scar before but had never known its origin. "They told me he wouldn't be able to serve anymore after that," Ben said. "I fought to keep him, but the regulations wouldn't allow it. When I heard he'd been retired and rehomed, I hoped he'd find someone who would love him as much as I did." Sounds like he found that with you. Emily swallowed hard, overwhelmed by the depth of Rocky's past. He's been there for me in ways I can't even describe, she said softly. I can't thank you enough for what you both did, for each other, and for everyone you protected. It's Rocky who deserves the thanks. Ben replied. He's a special dog. Emily always has been. After the call with Ben, Emily sat in silence for a long while, her hand resting on Rocky's head. She couldn't stop picturing the scenes Ben had described. Rocky in the chaos of a war zone, risking his life to save others. The thought filled her with a mix of awe and sadness. Rocky, she said softly, leaning closer to him. You've been through so much, haven't you? You're more than a guide. You're a hero. Rocky tilted his head, his amber eyes meeting hers with an unspoken understanding. She stroked his fur gently, marveling at how such a calm, steady companion had once been a soldier on the front lines. Feeling a newfound respect for Rocky's resilience, Emily decided to honor his past in a small but meaningful way. She reached out to the local Veterans Association and arranged to visit their monthly gathering, hoping to learn more about the roles of K-9 units in the military and share Rocky's story. A week later, Emily and Rocky arrived at the Ashwood Veterans Hall. The room was filled with men and women in uniform, their faces lighting up as they spotted Rocky trotting beside Emily. One man approached, his eyes immediately drawn to Rocky's distinctive scar. Is that a retired K-9? The man asked, his voice tinged with recognition. Yes, Emily replied, smiling. This is Rocky. He served in the military before he became my guide dog. The man knelt to greet Rocky, his hands gentle as he patted the dog's head. I worked with K-9 units during my time overseas, he said, his tone reverent. They're incredible, fearless, and they never stop giving, even after their service ends. As the evening went on, Emily shared what she had learned about Rocky's past. From his early training to his heroic final mission, she could see the respect in the veterans' eyes as they listened, some nodding in understanding, others sharing their own stories of K-9 partners. One older man spoke up. You know, these dogs aren't just soldiers, they're family. They stand by us when no one else will. Emily felt a lump rise in her throat. She glanced down at Rocky, who sat calmly by her side, his presence as steadying as ever. That's exactly what he's been for me, she said. Family. When they returned home that night, Emily felt a deeper connection with Rocky than ever before. She had always appreciated him as her guide dog, but now she understood the sacrifices he had made, the lives he had touched, and the strength he carried within him. Sitting on the couch with Rocky curled up beside her, Emily made a silent promise. I'll do everything I can to make sure the rest of your life is filled with peace and love, she whispered. You deserve it. Rocky let out a contented sigh, his tail thumping lightly against the cushions. In that moment, Emily knew their bond was unbreakable, forged not just by circumstance but by trust, loyalty, and an unshakable sense of purpose. The peace that Emily and Rocky had worked so hard to reclaim felt fragile, as if it could be shattered at any moment. Though she tried to move on from the terrifying encounter with Jake, a lingering sense of unease refused to fade. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside her window at night, set her on edge. Rocky, too, seemed more vigilant. He patrolled the house more often, his ears constantly twitching as he listened for anything out of the ordinary. Emily found his presence reassuring, a constant reminder that she wasn't alone. One quiet evening, as Emily was settling in with a cup of tea and her favorite audiobook, Rocky's low growl broke the silence. Her hand paused mid-air, the mug hovering just inches from her lips. What is it, boy? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Rocky rose from his spot by the fireplace, his stance rigid and his eyes locked on the front door. Emily's heart began to race. She strained to listen, her ears catching the faint sound of crunching gravel outside. Her stomach tightened. It was late, far too late for visitors. Emily reached for her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed the sheriff's office. This is Emily Carter, she said quickly. I think someone's outside my house. The dispatcher's voice was calm, but the urgency was clear. "Stay inside, Ms. Carter. Lock your doors. We'll send someone right away." Emily hung up and stood, her cane in one hand and her free hand gripping the back of the chair for support. "Rocky, stay close," she murmured. The German shepherd moved to her side, his growl deepening as the sound of footsteps approached the porch. A loud knock echoed through the house, sharp and deliberate. Emily froze, every nerve in her body screaming to stay quiet. "Emily," Jake's voice called out, loud and mocking. "I told you this wasn't over." Her breath caught in her throat. She tightened her grip on Rocky's harness, silently willing herself to stay calm. Another knock, harder this time, followed by the unmistakable sound of someone trying the doorknob. "Come on, Emily," Jake taunted. "Don't make me break it down." Rocky barked sharply, the sound reverberating through the room like a warning shot. Emily reached down to steady him, her hand brushing against his fur. "It's okay, boy," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she believed it herself. Outside, Jake laughed. "That mutt of yours can bark all he wants," he sneered. "Won't stop me." Emily backed away from the door, her mind racing as she tried to think of what to do. The sound of another set of footsteps made her blood run cold. Jake wasn't alone. Emily's pulse quickened as she heard the voices outside. Jake wasn't alone. At least one other person had joined him. Their muffled conversation was punctuated by occasional laughter, a sound that sent chills down her spine. Rocky remained by her side, his growl unwavering. The tension in his body was palpable, as though he were waiting for the moment to act. Emily's hand trembled as she reached for her phone again, dialing the sheriff's office for the second time that night. "This is Emily Carter," she said, her voice barely steady. "They're trying to get in. There's more than one of them. We've dispatched a unit, ma'am." The dispatcher replied, "They're close. Stay on the line if you can." Emily nodded, clutching the phone tightly, but before she could respond, the sharp sound of glass shattering filled the air. She flinched, instinctively pulling Rocky closer. Her living room window, someone had broken it. "You hear that?" Jake's voice was louder now. "Closer. We're not leaving until you come out." Rocky barked furiously, the sound fierce enough to make Emily's ears ring. She took a shaky breath, her mind racing for options. The front door was locked and barricaded, but now there was a broken window. How long would it take for Jake and his accomplice to find a way in? "Emily, I'm going to enjoy this," Jake taunted. The sound of his boots crunching on the porch made it clear he was circling the house. Emily's free hand gripped her cane tightly, her knuckles white. "Rocky," she whispered, leaning toward him. "We've got this. Just stay with me." The dog's growl deepened, his gaze locked on the shattered window. Emily could hear someone trying to clear the shards of glass from the frame, the metallic scrape of a crowbar against the windowsill sending another wave of panic through her. "I've got to protect us," she thought, her resolve hardening. She felt her way to the kitchen counter, where a small canister of pepper spray was stored. Rocky followed closely, his presence grounding her as she moved. As she returned to the living room, she heard the unmistakable sound of someone climbing through the window. Jake's accomplice let out a grunt as he hoisted himself inside. Emily's heart pounded, but she held her ground. Rocky barked again, louder this time, his body tense and ready. The man inside cursed under his breath, clearly not expecting the fierce resistance. "Jake, this dog's gonna tear me apart," he yelled. Jake's voice came from outside. "Quit whining and deal with it. She's not gonna fight back." But Jake was wrong. Emily held the pepper spray tightly, her fingers steady despite the fear coursing through her. She stood by Rocky, ready to defend her home. Just as she prepared to confront the intruder, the faint wail of sirens broke through the night air. Relief surged through her, but the danger wasn't over yet. Jake cursed loudly, his footsteps retreating. "Let's go," he shouted. The sound of retreating footsteps filled Emily with a fleeting sense of relief. But Rocky wasn't letting his guard down. His growls continued, low and steady, as he remained focused on the broken window. "Emily, clutching the pepper spray tightly, tried to listen for any signs that Jake or his accomplice might return. "Stay close, Rocky," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of her racing heartbeat. A moment later, there was a loud crash. A second man attempting to force the back door. Rocky's head snapped toward the noise, his body tense and ready to spring into action. Emily's grip on his harness tightened. "It's okay, boy," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "Help is almost here." But Jake wasn't giving up so easily. His voice rang out again, this time from the side of the house. "You think a dog and some locked doors are gonna stop us? You're pathetic, Emily." Rocky barked furiously in response, his powerful voice reverberating through the room. The sound seemed to rattle Jake and his accomplice, but they continued their attempts to gain entry. Emily heard one of them mutter, "This isn't worth it, man. That dog's gonna kill us." "Shut up and keep going," Jake snapped. The sirens grew louder, cutting through the tense air like a lifeline. Red and blue lights began to flash through the broken window, casting long shadows across the living room. Emily's breath hitched as the sound of car doors slamming and voices calling out signaled that the deputies had arrived. "This is the Ashwood Sheriff's Department." A commanding voice boomed from outside. "Step away from the house with your hands up." There was a long pause, followed by hurried footsteps as Jake and his accomplice scrambled to flee. Rocky barked sharply, moving to the door as if urging Emily to stay put. From her spot by the kitchen counter, Emily could hear the deputies shouting commands outside. Moments later, the sound of a scuffle reached her ears, followed by one deputy's voice. "We've got them in custody." Emily exhaled deeply, her knees almost giving out beneath her. She crouched down, wrapping her arms around Rocky's neck. "We're okay, Rocky. It's over." A firm knock at the door made her jump. "Ms. Carter? It's Deputy Morgan. Are you all right?" Emily hurried to unlock the door, her hands trembling as she opened it. Deputy Morgan stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room before settling on the shattered window. His gaze softened when he saw Emily and Rocky. "We've got both suspects in custody," he said. "You're safe now." Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered, "but I wouldn't have been if it weren't for Rocky." Deputy Morgan crouched down, giving Rocky a pat on the head. "You've got a real hero here, Ms. Carter. He didn't just protect you. He made sure those guys knew they messed with the wrong house." Rocky leaned into Emily, his tail wagging faintly as if he understood the praise. Emily rested her forehead against his, a sense of gratitude and love flooding through her. "You're my hero," she murmured. The deputies stayed to secure the property and ensure Emily was comfortable before leaving. As the house grew quiet once more, Emily sat on the floor beside Rocky, stroking his fur. "You've done so much for me," she said softly, "and I'll never stop being grateful." Rocky let out a contented sigh, curling up beside her. Despite the chaos of the night, Emily felt safer than ever, knowing that Rocky was always by her side. The house was finally quiet again, but the events of the night left a mark on Emily. The shattered window and broken glass had been cleaned up, yet the tension still lingered in the air. Even with Jake and his accomplice in custody, Emily couldn't shake the unease that clung to her. Rocky, as always, stayed close. His watchful eyes followed her every movement, his presence a constant reminder of her safety. Yet as Emily sat by the fireplace, stroking his fur, she couldn't help but feel the weight of everything that had happened. For years, she had relied on Rocky to guide her through the darkness, both literal and emotional, but last night had forced her to confront a truth she had been avoiding. She needed to trust herself, too. "You can't always protect me, Rocky," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "What if something happens to you? What if I'm left on my own?" Rocky's ears flicked at her words, his tail thumping softly against the floor as if reassuring her. Emily smiled faintly, grateful for his loyalty, but the question lingered in her mind. She knew she couldn't rely on Rocky to shoulder all the burdens of her safety. The next morning, Emily made a decision. After calling the sheriff's office to confirm Jake's incarceration, she picked up her phone and dialed another number. A self-defense instructor who specialized in working with individuals with disabilities. "I want to learn how to protect myself," she said firmly when the instructor answered. The voice on the other end was warm and encouraging. "That's a great decision, Emily. I promise you, we'll take it one step at a time. You'll feel more confident in no time." That afternoon, Emily and Rocky arrived at the community center for her first lesson. The instructor, a former martial artist named Lisa, greeted her warmly. "Welcome, Emily, and this must be Rocky," Lisa said, crouching to pet the German Shepherd. Emily nodded, gripping Rocky's harness tightly. "He's always been my protector, but now, I need to learn how to protect myself." Lisa smiled. "You've already taken the hardest step by showing up. Let's get started." The first session was both challenging and empowering. Lisa walked Emily through basic techniques for escaping holds and defending herself with minimal force. While Rocky watched from the sidelines, Emily found herself feeling more capable with each passing moment. By the end of the hour, she was sweating and exhausted, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of confidence. As she left the center, Rocky walking faithfully by her side, Emily realized she was beginning to reclaim a part of herself she thought she had lost. Over the following weeks, Emily continued her self-defense lessons with unwavering determination. Each session left her more confident, not just in her ability to protect herself, but in her capacity to face the fears that had long held her captive. Rocky accompanied her to every class, his calm presence grounding her during moments of doubt. One afternoon, as Emily practiced her newly learned techniques, Lisa paused and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Emily, I've been working with people for years, and I have to say you're one of the most determined students I've ever met. You don't let anything hold you back." Emily's cheeks flushed with pride. "I've had a lot of help," she admitted, her hand brushing Rocky's fur. "He's taught me how to be brave." Lisa smiled. "Well, it shows. You've come a long way." That evening, Emily sat on her porch with Rocky by her side. The air was cool, the sky painted in shades of pink and orange as the sun dipped below the horizon. For the first time in what felt like forever, Emily allowed herself to simply breathe. "You've been through so much," she said softly, scratching behind Rocky's ears. "But you've never let it stop you. I need to be more like you." Rocky rested his head on her lap, his eyes closing in contentment. Emily smiled, a sense of peace washing over her. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of gravel crunching under tires. Car pulled up to her driveway, and a familiar figure stepped out. It was Deputy Morgan, holding a small folder. "Evening, Miss Carter," he said, tipping his hat. "I wanted to stop by and give you an update on Jake Malloy." Emily tensed slightly, but Morgan's reassuring tone put her at ease. "He won't be bothering you anymore," Morgan said firmly. "He's facing charges for trespassing, attempted assault, and property damage. His accomplice has turned over evidence against him, so it's an airtight case." Emily exhaled, relief flooding through her. "Thank you, Deputy. That's good to hear." Morgan nodded and then handed her the folder. "I also thought you'd like to see this. It's a certificate from the K9 unit where Rocky served. A little recognition for your four-legged hero here." Emily opened the folder to reveal a beautifully designed certificate, complete with Rocky's name and the emblem of the military unit he had served. Tears filled her eyes as she read the words. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. As Morgan drove away, Emily sat back down with Rocky, holding the certificate close. "You've always been my hero," she whispered. "But now the whole world knows it too." The stars began to appear in the darkening sky, and Emily leaned back, feeling stronger than she ever had before. The fears of the past no longer held her in their grip. She had faced them head-on, with Rocky by her side every step of the way. And together, they were ready for whatever came next. Months passed, and life in Ashwood began to feel normal again. Emily's house had been repaired, the shattered window replaced, and the unsettling memories of that night slowly faded. But Emily herself was no longer the same. The fear that had once defined her existence had been replaced by a quiet confidence. Rocky, too, had found his place in the community. After his heroic actions became known, people in Ashwood began recognizing him wherever they went. Children at the park would run up to pet him, and adults would stop Emily to thank her for sharing his story. Rocky accepted the attention with his usual calm, his wagging tail the only sign of his pleasure. One crisp morning, Emily received a call from the Ashwood Community Center. The director, a woman named Carol, invited her to speak at an upcoming event honoring service animals and their contributions to society. Emily hesitated at first. The idea of standing in front of a crowd, sharing her story, was daunting, but Carol's words stayed with her. "Your journey with Rocky could inspire so many people," Carol had said. "It's not just about what he's done, but about what you've achieved together." Emily thought of all the challenges she had faced, the loss of her sight, the nights filled with fear, and the moments when she doubted herself. But she also thought of how far she had come, and how much Rocky had been by her side through it all. When the day of the event arrived, Emily felt a mix of nerves and determination. She and Rocky stood backstage, waiting for their turn to speak. She reached down to stroke his fur, finding comfort in the steady rhythm of his breathing. "We've got this, Rocky," she whispered. The applause from the audience signaled it was their time. Emily walked onto the stage with Rocky at her side, her cane tapping lightly against the floor. The room fell silent as she took her place at the microphone. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "My name is Emily Carter, and this is Rocky. For the past 2 years, he's been my guide, my protector, and my family. But what I didn't know when I first met him was that he had already spent a lifetime being a hero." As Emily shared Rocky's story, the sacrifices he made as a K9, the courage he showed during the break-in, and the quiet strength he carried every day, she saw the audience's faces light up with admiration. "Rocky has taught me something I'll never forget," Emily said, her voice filled with emotion. "That no matter how broken we feel, there's always a way to rebuild. We just have to keep moving forward, one step at a time." The room erupted into applause as she finished. Emily crouched beside Rocky, giving him a hug. "This is for you, boy," she whispered. As the applause continued, Emily felt a warmth spread through her chest. This wasn't just a moment for her, it was for Rocky, for everything they had endured together. Standing before the crowd, she realized how far she had come, not just in her journey of healing, but in her willingness to share it with others. After the event, people approached Emily to thank her. Families with guide dogs and service animals shared their own stories, creating a sense of camaraderie she hadn't experienced before. Children ran up to Rocky, their laughter echoing through the hall as they patted his head and admired his calm demeanor. Carol, the director of the community center, came over and handed Emily a small envelope. "This is for Rocky," she said with a smile. Inside was a medal engraved with the words, "In honor of service and bravery." Emily's throat tightened as she turned the medal over in her hands. She crouched beside Rocky, holding the medal up for him to see. "This is yours, boy," she said, her voice trembling. "You've earned it." Rocky's tail wagged slowly as if he understood the significance of the moment. Emily fastened the medal to his collar, the silver gleaming under the overhead lights. The crowd cheered as Rocky stood proudly, his posture as steady and dignified as ever. Later that evening, as Emily and Rocky returned home, the quiet of the house felt comforting rather than daunting. Emily placed the medal on the mantel, letting it catch the soft glow of the lamp. It wasn't just a symbol of Rocky's courage. It was a reminder of the bond they shared and the strength they had both found. Sitting on the couch, Emily opened her laptop and began typing. The experience of speaking at the event had sparked something in her, a desire to reach even more people. She decided to start a blog, sharing stories about her life with Rocky and the lessons she had learned. The blog, titled Rocky's Legacy, quickly gained traction. People from all over the country wrote to Emily, sharing how her stories inspired them to overcome their own challenges. The community that grew around the blog was filled with gratitude, hope, and a shared love for the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. Months later, Emily found herself back at the Ashwood Community Park, walking along the familiar trails with Rocky by her side. The town felt different now, warmer, more connected. People stopped to greet her, often mentioning how her blog had touched their lives. As they reached the edge of the pond, Emily paused, the sunlight dancing on the water's surface. She knelt beside Rocky, running her fingers through his fur. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Rocky let out a soft bark, his tail wagging gently. Emily smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace. The fear and doubt that had once consumed her were gone, replaced by resilience and purpose. Together, she and Rocky turned back toward the town, ready for whatever the future might bring.